I am very excited to see all of you Wednesdays at noon. This is our thing. We only have one more Wednesday at noon. Next week will be our last Wednesday at noon. It'll be our teaching chat. I'll put in everyone's radar that if you're earning a professional development certificate, we have all the information for that and on our website, and Tucker or Ashley will drop that into the link for you to check that out. We also select TLC fellows. So if you want to make a nomination for yourself for that, we would love to see that. And next week will be our teaching chat. So it'll be kind of a free-for-all section. We can kind of talk about and share ideas about the end of the semester. We can bring questions. I always have questions. So I'll have questions that we can kind of consider and talk about, but that'll be our last one of the semester. That doesn't mean we're not available for consultation or questions at any other point. Just reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your ideas. We'd love to share our ideas with you. But today we have an amazing presentation set up. We have Pat Ackerman from Polytechnic, who is a University Distinguished Teaching Scholar, and she's going to be presenting us today on online education through the lens of technical communication, readability, and plain language. So you didn't come to hear me this week, you came to hear Pat, so I'm going to give the floor to her, and I'm very excited to hear her presentation.
Thank you, Don. Let me share my screen here a minute for you. Again, welcome to my living room. It's nice to have faces, and if you hear noises in the background, it's because all of my doors and windows are open and the birds are singing, and today the Baltimore Orioles came back, so I really want to leave the windows open because that makes me excited. So as Don said, I'm Pat Ackerman. I have been teaching at Kansas State University for 21 years. And parts of this presentation I've actually presented in Manhattan before at one of the teaching retreats or something, but I see a lot of folks I don't know. So hopefully this will be new information for you. So this is a list of courses I've taught over the last 20 years, primarily in communications and in writing. My dissertation is in discourse over writing, and I've worked with writing centers, and I've done research in readability analysis, which is what I have presented on the main campus before. But in the last 6 years, I've been asked to teach technical writing and I teach in the College of Technology and Aviation. And one of our faculty members took a position in China. So I had a lot of years of working in business. And so I have begun teaching technical communication on both graduate and undergraduate levels. And I'm learning along with the students. And interestingly enough, a lot of my research interests have converged as I began teaching this course. And that's what I want to share with you today. So we are in a time of change, and during times of change, it's important to step back and look at the big picture. So if you were to go into K-State's homepage right now and look for the academic vision, this is the Kansas State University academic vision. I won't read it all to you because you're adults and you can read, but the last sentence is the one that really is relevant to what we're talking about today, because it says, we endeavor to prepare citizens who will, I need to get rid of this so I can see. We endeavor to prepare citizens who will continue to learn and will contribute to the societies in which they live and work. That last line, the societies in which they live and work, we have really been brought nose to nose with that in the last year. Okay, the societies that our students live and work in have been changing for a decade because of technology. But the last year, the changes that we were all forced to deal with should also make us think about the ways that we teach. And each one of us can tell stories about how our teaching had to change over the last year and what worked and didn't work. And so keeping the K-State academic vision in mind, I think, is important as we go through some of these transitions. We also are all familiar with the K-State undergraduate student learning outcomes, which say that regardless of what degree a student is earning at Kansas State University, there are core principles that they should be learning, whether they're in the College of Ag, the College of Vet Med, the College of Technology and Aviation, Arts and Sciences. All students should leave our campus with both a depth and breadth of knowledge, diversity awareness, high levels of academic and professional integrity, and the two that I want to talk about today, communication and critical thinking. So if you go into the provost webpage or into the Office of Assessment and you look up the undergraduate student learning outcomes, these are the definitions of the student learning outcome for critical thinking and communication. Critical thinking, students will demonstrate the ability to access and interpret information, respond and adapt to changing situations, make complex decisions, solve problems, evaluate actions. In that one, there's some key words in there that really resonate with me regarding online education, responding and adapting to changing situations. Our students and our faculty have had to do that in the past year, make complex decisions, solve problems that we haven't faced before, and then evaluate how those things work. And we're asking our students to do that in an online platform. And again, demonstrate the ability to communicate clearly and effectively. During our year of critical thinking, one of the things that we talked about was how critical thinking, how the definition of critical thinking can change from discipline to discipline. And that's also true of communication. As we came up through our own educations and now as faculty members, we're most comfortable with academic writing. And academic writing doesn't always translate well in an online environment. And it was actually a student who brought this all to my attention, and I'm going to tell that story in a minute. So the three things I want to talk about today regarding online teaching, to get you to look at your online teaching through the lens of what is technical writing and why might academics need to learn to also communicate using technical writing principles. A little bit about the history of readability analysis and how that plays into information that we share in online platforms, and also a little bit about the history of plain language and how it can be applied as a tool to make our online teaching more effective. So in my technical writing class, one of the assignments I give is I ask students to go out and find what they think is a really bad set of written instructions and rewrite them using the principles of plain language that they've been taught in the foundational part of my course. And a few years ago, I had a student who, a lot of students choose recipes or how to assemble a piece of furniture, they rewrite those, how to change a tire. But this student took an assignment that was written in another course by an academic that was very text heavy. It was just a big, long block of narrative text with all of the instructions buried in it, and they had to ferret that out in order to figure out what the teacher wanted. And that student took that assignment and rewrote it using the principles of plain language. And in an attachment to her assignment, when she submitted it, she said, if all of my teachers would do this, it would be so much easier for me online to understand what they want. And it would take me less time to get my work done, and I think I would be a better student. That really made me start thinking about how I share my information. I'm asking students to create technical documents using plain language, but what I'm doing online in Canvas is actually technical communication. It's in an academic setting. There's a lot of academic content, but that I needed to, in my syllabus and in my assignments, start applying these principles so that my message so that it would be easier for students to find, understand, and use information in my assignments. So I'm going to go over each one of these briefly. So in traditional academic writing, we assign research papers, essays, reports, bibliographies. The primary audience for students when they're writing these assignments is the instructor. For them, ultimately, they want to get a grade so they can pass the course, so they can graduate, so they can get their dream job. Occasionally, depending on the course, the audience may also be peers in the classroom if you do peer review, but overall, the audiences are all people who have a high school diploma or above. And their objective is, for those assignments usually, is to demonstrate understanding, to inform, persuade, get a grade, earn a degree. Those are their objectives for traditional academic assignments. Technical communication, the dynamics are different when you create a technical document or when you're teaching online, as opposed to when you're writing an academic paper about teaching. So technical communication has a whole set of activities. I'm going to key in on some of these primary words here in a little bit, but the dynamics are different. The reader wants something or expects something from the writer, and the writer wants the reader to find specific information and act in a certain way. So when you write an assignment, you have expectations on that student. and what you want them to do and what you want them to learn, and how you want them to do it. And when a student reads those instructions for that, they have expectations on you as well. They want to be able to find that information quickly, understand what you meant without having to read through heavy text-laden documents or call you or email you. They just want to be able to look at it and figure out what you want. So the audience for technical documents is much broader, okay? It isn't always just the instructor. If you're writing an instruction manual or a proposal or any other type of technical document, your audience may change as you're creating the document. And so the objective becomes about how to help readers find, understand, and use information effectively. So I take these same definitions that I just gave you in technical communication, and I pull out some key language as I reflect on online education, okay? When you write assignments, you want students to discover, shape, transmit information, solve problems, carry out a particular task, make critical decisions. And so our expectations in online education are similar to the types of expectations that occur in technical communication. Deliverables in technical writing can go beyond research papers and bibliographies and lab reports. There are any number of deliverables, and those that are bold-faced here in this list are the ones that I ask students to produce in my technical writing classes. So you can see that these are all different kinds of documents that have different dynamics, and they're also similar to a lot of the types of documents that we're sharing with students in our online courses. So now I want to talk a little bit about readability. Readability analysis is a pedagogical area that I have been studying for over, maybe 15 years. Just for a little history for those who don't know, that in 1940, a man named Rudolf Flesch developed something called the Reading Ease Readability Formula that I'm going to share with you in a minute. But basically, it's a formula for analyzing the readability of a block of text, okay? You may have heard, and I ask students this all the time, what have you heard that the average American citizen, what grade level do they read at? And they all say, oh, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, that's what they think. So initially this started with the military because they were concerned that documents they were producing were being written above the reading level of enlisted men and that they weren't able to understand all of the documents they were producing. So Rudolf Flesch developed a formula for analyzing a block of text and determining its readability level. Then in 1976, under contract with the Navy, John Kincaid took that formula a step above, and instead of a scale of 1 to 100 like Flesch used, he used a grade level score. Since then, over 40 different readability formulas have been developed to analyze text to determine what its readability level is. But these are the two most well-known ones. So this is Flesch's Reading Ease score. Basically, he uses average sentence length and average number of syllables per word to analyze a piece of text. And the higher the score, the easier it is, the piece of text. The lower the score, the more difficult it is. So so interpreting the scores, if it scores 90 to 100, it's easily understood by an average 11-year-old. And here are some examples of publications that score their readability scores in this range. So obviously the Harvard Law Review scores lower, which means it's best understood by college graduates. If you're not familiar with this, most software that has in which you type documents in has the ability to analyze your text. But I have many colleagues who were around were teaching and analyzing textbooks to decide what grade level they were appropriate for in the field of education before we had computers. And so they remember applying these formulas manually, going through, taking a block of text, analyzing average sentence length, average word, and deciding if this book is this textbook's appropriate for 6th grade, this textbook's appropriate for 11th grade. And so this is Flesh's score. And then Kincaid's score, the Flesch-Kincaid grade level score, modifies the formula and again uses average sentence length and average number of syllables per word to decide which textbook is appropriate for which reading level. And again, there have been a lot of studies to show that the average American citizen reads at about a 7th to 8th grade reading level. So when we produce documents as college professors, we anticipate that our students are capable of reading something above, for instance, a 7th grade reading level. But when you put things in an online format, our students' expectations have changed in terms of accessibility of information. They're used to being able to find things quickly. And no, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't have to learn how to write academic papers in an academic setting, but when we're creating instructions for them in Canvas, it might be helpful for them, if we consider some of these things. And so I'm going to show you just a few blocks of text that you might recognize that have been run through the software for Flesch-Kincaid grade level score to see how it ranks. Okay, here's the Gettysburg Address written at between a 10th and 11th grade reading level. A piece by Albert Einstein, above high school level. Speech by President Eisenhower, 1953, 8th grade reading level. And Barack Obama's inaugural address in 2009, written at a 12th grade level. I won't get into this because it's an entirely different presentation, but for about 15 years, I've used this formula to help teach students in writing classes. I use it as a tool for helping them look at their writing through a different lens instead of just through the instructor's lens, which they claim is too subjective sometimes. It gives them an opportunity to look at their writing. And even though they think they're a really good writer, when they use the software and find out that they're writing at a 6th grade reading level and that there are some things they can do to improve the dynamics of their writing, it opens their eyes. But that's a whole nother subject for another day. But I just wanted to share some examples with you. Practical applications for readability analysis. It's used for textbook selection in educational arenas. The government uses it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Department of Defense, insurance companies are now using it. All of the primary word processing software has the ability for you to conduct a readability analysis of a piece of writing. And I've been to many professional writing conferences where I was really shocked to find out about how many professional authors use software to analyze their writing of a book that they're writing so that it helps to target the audience they're aiming for. This is particularly true for young adult lit authors. They say, you know, I want to make sure I'm not writing over the heads of 8th graders. And so I do this to see if I'm on target with my audience. So I'm giving you this just as background information to lead into a little bit of discussion about plain language. I will share this PowerPoint presentation with Dawn and Tucker so that they can make it available to you. But these are the instructions for how to find the readability analysis tool in Microsoft Word. Okay, so we talked a little bit about technical writing, we talked about readability analysis, and now I want to talk about plain language. Okay, going back to those definitions of technical communication, most important is that the objective is to help readers find, understand, and use information effectively. And when we're designing assignments in Canvas, our readers are our students. And what can we do to make it easier for them to find, understand, and use information? So following up on the US government and the Department of Education and the Department of Defense have been interested in making government documents more readable, clear back to Rudolf Flesch's time. Okay, so as that has progressed, in 2010, Barack Obama signed into law the plain English legislation. And basically what it says is that all federal government agencies are now required to develop plain language protocols and train their employees to produce more readable documents. And so I'm going to share with you a couple of, all of these websites you'll have access to. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and share a couple of things with you, these resources that can help you learn a little bit more about plain language if it's something that you don't know about. Now there's a lot, I have also had colleagues who are really opposed to this because they say these are college students, they should be writing academic papers. That's true, but those of us who are teaching online, presenting our instructions in academic formats can create obstacles for students. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this screen and go to, oh, I see things in the chat. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing them while I'm talking. Nope, sorry. Sharing that. I have it open here somewhere. I just have to find it. There it is. So here's the home page. Can you see the plainlanguage.gov page? Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the home page for plainlanguage.gov, which talks about the new law that was passed in 2010, what plain language is, what the guidelines are, how to train people. And one of the things I've talked to Global Campus about is the idea of developing some micro courses for the public, because a lot of organizations and agencies are being required to train their employees to understand what plain language is. And so this is the homepage that's available to anyone for this law that's passed. But I will say that not only are federal government agencies using plain language, especially in online environments, but now the business world. If you study the plain language principles and then you go look at the web pages of major corporations, you'll see that they are applying the principles of plain language in the production of documents that they're publishing online as well. Are you seeing that Federal Aviation Administration page now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so in technical writing, I teach on a campus where a large percentage of my students are pilots in training. And so one of the things I do in my tech writing course is I require them to complete these 9 modules. This is the Federal Aviation Administration, how they've incorporated the new plain language law into their operations and training of their employees. And so I have students complete all 9 of these modules as part of the tech writing course. And then after they've completed the modules, the documents that they then produce for me, or the deliverables they produce for the course, have to reflect an understanding of plain language, because I'm not to replace their other writing, but to teach them another way to approach creation of documents that will probably be used in an online environment. So this is FAA, and there are a lot of other tools in the FAA's website. But recently I went online to the Social Security Administration's office to find out how to get a replacement Social Security card, and look what I found there. A whole section in Social Security about defining plain language and the Social Security Administration's plain language plan and how they use it. And if you look at their document, if you had studied the principles of plain language, you should see that they apply it to this page with subheadings, white space, bullet points, no serif fonts, only sans serif fonts. Some of the things that they talk about in plain language to make a document more readable so that it's easier for viewers to find, understand, and use information. No, that's not the one I want to share with you. Okay, so let me go back to my PowerPoint. feel like I should look in the chat room and see. I'm going to come back to the chat and get to the end of my presentation, and then I'll come back to that because I do see some really good questions and comments there. So go back to the PowerPoint. All of these links are going to be available to you. I will point out that at the end, there is also a link, oh shoot, to the Simplified Technical English Manual, which is similar to the United States federal government's plain language ruling, but this is a manual that's used primarily on an international scale. It comes out of Europe, and so I've given that link to you as well. So the overall, just a quick thumbnail about plain language. Some of their things that they emphasize is vocabulary, the use of pronouns, the importance of active voice, formatting. So all of those are described and explained here by a gentleman named Bruce Corsino, who is with the Federal Aviation Administration. And then there's also a document here called a Plain Language Toolkit. That's just a one-page sheet that kind of is an overview of plain language principles. There I've listed some of them out. So chunking of information, white space, bulleted list, pronouns, use of contractions, sans serif fonts. So if you were to study or take those modules regarding plain language, those are some of the things they would talk about, which are also consistent with technical writing. So I'm just inviting all of you to consider your online teaching practice through this lens of what it means to be a technical writer, because when you enter into an online teaching environment, yes, you're still an academic, you're still a professional in your discipline, but you are also becoming a technical communicator. You are communicating in a technical environment. And how can you use all tools available to make those documents more readable for students, make it easier for them to find, understand, and use information so that they can accomplish the goals that we have set for them. And I'm learning too that students aren't as inclined to ask questions in my online courses as they are in a face-to-face classroom, which means they're trying to solve all these problems on their own, just through what I publish in the Canvas, and sometimes they don't interpret it correctly. The other thing I do in each of my classes is that I construct an online toolbox, a separate Canvas module that's an online toolbox, and including the FAA tutorials, other things I put in there so that they have access to them all the time throughout the course, since they're very often working independently outside of the virtual classroom. And I encourage them to save those links into their own computers so that they can use these tools not only for their classes, but when they get into their professional environments and they remember that something was helpful or that it helped them communicate, but they can't remember all of the tools. So I create a toolbox for them. Again, there are a lot of surveys and studies about what employers want from our graduates, but this is an older one, but it very definitely ties in with the things that I'm talking about and our student learning outcomes. And so how are we who are now, coronavirus may be temporary, but I think it's going to change the way we do things in the future and the expectations from students. I know Tucker was talking about potential for a hybrid model of TLC presenting next year. So a lot of things are changing. There will be more and more technology used to deliver information for a lot of purposes. And so I think it just was really helpful for me to think about my teaching through the lens of these tools. And I'm just sharing them with you and inviting you to consider that. And we all know what has worked for us and what has not worked for us over the past year, or if you've been teaching in online environments for a long time. There are certain strategies that help, but students, first of all, they live in a world where they're used to immediate gratification. They don't want to have to open up something on their screen and read 3 columns of solid text in a big blob of gray. They're not going to read it all. So if we can organize that, present that information in a little bit different way so that it guides their eye through it and uses good principles of good design, then hopefully it will increase their level of success in the courses. I've also included sources for all of this information, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go back maybe. And should I go to the chat room, Dawn, now and start there with conversation, or just open it up?
I think you can open it up. I'll tell you what, if things don't come up in the chat come up from the chat organically, I'll feed the conversation with things from the chat.
Okay, well, let's do that. I'm finished. Thank you all for listening.
So there are some questions in the chat about how the readability scores reflect readability equally for native and non-native speakers of English. Talking about how smaller words are often easier for native speakers, but they often create problems for non-native speakers. So this person is asking if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I teach a lot of international students because we have a lot of students from the Middle East and Africa and Asia in our programs. And I think it's helpful for those students because they understand the need to organize information, but we still need to accommodate second language learners in different ways, you know. But I think from a readability standpoint, when I create an assignment using these principles, it makes it easier for second language learners to find, understand, and use information than if they have to filter through a paragraph. So instead of a paragraph where I list, you can do this or this or this or this, if I say your options are da-da-da-da-da-da-da, it's much easier for a second language learner to comprehend and use that information.
So someone else asked if the formulas for readability can be applied to things that aren't written in traditional narratives, like for an exam, for instance, like a multiple choice exam where you don't have complete sentences.
I've never done that, but you could certainly try it. Some of the things that the tool looks for, yeah. The tools I've used with students. I've used Grammarly, I've used Microsoft Word, and I've used Writer's Workbench. For many years, for about 10 years, I used Writer's Workbench, and they had a readability analysis in there, but I didn't ever use it on exams. What I used it a lot for was to help students get a more objective. So if they come in and they said, look, I was an A writer all through school, and you gave me a C on this paper. I didn't give you a C, this is a C paper. It's difficult for them to see that. They think it's just your opinion. And so by giving them the tool of the readability software, they can say, look, this says this is a 6th grade reading level. That's not a writing score. And I'm not grading you on it, but let's talk about what you can do to improve the dynamics of your writing. More active verbs, a bigger variety of sentence structure, all these things. And if you do those, so then they would go and revise with those things in mind, run the paper through the software again, and see that their score went up to a 9th grade reading level. They're actually able to see it, and it removes some of the subjectivity, that there really is a strategy here. It's not just because I don't like you. It's, you know, it's not that at all.
So one of the themes that came up in the chat is the difference between readability and understandability, and kind of getting at the fact that sometimes students are writing, you know, sentences that might make sense, but it's not actually conveying that they understand the concepts.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the readability versus understandability.
Well, the software and the formula can't read for vagueness or precision of language. It can only tell them if there are certain things, like if their vocabulary is a 4th grade vocabulary, or if they're using words that reflect a higher level of understanding and knowledge. Okay, so the software can't read for vagueness and confusion. It can't. So it really, that's the difference, I think, in readability and understandability is the ability to communicate content. That's not something that the formula can analyze.
Sure. And Ava has her hand up.
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, and you probably just answered this question, but is there a version of it that can score for scientific, you know, if there's scientific terms in something, So some of those scientific terms are going to have bigger words. So is there a way to score it for readability, but also not have it sort of elevated in grade level just because you got a bunch of scientific terms in it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, what you're saying, if you think about the formula, that it's average sentence length, average syllables per word. So if you're using a lot of technical scientific jargon, they're going to be long words with multiple syllabic words. And so, yes, it is going to elevate the score. And I don't know how you would instruct it to do differently. I think that's only something that a knowledgeable reader of the content could interpret.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just thinking about it from the formula perspective. Yeah.
And there's a couple of places where there were shameless plugs for resources. One was my shameless plug for our Engage the Sage video last week on the 4 C's of writing. One of the things I actually recommend against is don't use your thesaurus when you're writing. You know, pick the best, easiest word to do that. Andy also plugged the linguistics courses that she and her colleagues teach so well to help us out with this. There's some other resources though that people were wondering about, and maybe you could point them to, because another theme in the chat is that a lot of times the documents we read are not written to be readable. So the models we see aren't great.
Right.
And so are there information how to write training materials to industry? And are there resources for using things like line breaks to optimize readability? So are there other resources or guides you could point our audience to?
Yeah, and I think some of them are in my reference there, but all of the technical writing textbooks are broken down by those different types of writing that you use in business, any textbook, and I can share a list of those. There are also, and we're talking about workplace English, and there's considerable research about workplace English, and that isn't what all of our colleges and all of our disciplines want from their students. And I'm just looking at it as, from an online teaching perspective, an increased awareness of this might make us more effective teaching in online platforms. I'm not proposing that each of you should be teaching this to your students. I teach it to students in addition to what they're already being taught in expository writing and their courses. This isn't to replace that at all. This is just a different kind of awareness. And it occurred to me through this student's reflection that this same awareness is important for faculty.
And I absolutely agree with that. So one of the things that I'm curious about is tomorrow, when I'm preparing materials for my class or even preparing to talk to my class, what are a couple of things that are going to automatically help my ability to communicate with my students that, you know, might not involve resources, softwares, formulas, those kind of things, but what are some things I can do tomorrow to make my communication better for my students?
So if you listen to Bruce Corsino's tutorial videos on the FAA website, he's very personable and he gets his point across really well. But he, you know, for instance, when you're writing your assignments to your students, saying use personal pronouns. See, and we're taught in academic writing to be objective and not use personal pronouns. But when you're giving someone instructions, you should use personal pronouns because you're talking to them. And those are the kinds of things you can do to engage people more. Personal pronouns, active verbs, the organization of information. Yeah, if you have time to watch those 9 tutorials, they're about 6 minutes a piece, so it takes about an hour to go through them. And what happens with the students who I have do this is they're like, this makes so much sense. It makes sense to them with what they know and do every day.
I love that you mentioned the personal pronouns. This is something I've advocated for a long time for my students, is to use first person pronouns. You know, I'm a psychologist, we write in APA format, and APA format says we should be using active voice and first person pronouns when they're appropriate.
Right.
I have a colleague in my department who regularly tells my students that's bad writing when they do that. And it's hard because I think, as you said, you know, the purpose of writing is communication. And anything that impedes that, anything that sets the barrier up, as Trina talked about in a chat comment, our purpose is to remove barriers to our students' education and learning. Right. And I think sometimes just our stereotypes about what professional writing look like get in the way of us actually writing to what writing's purpose should be.
Yeah, and you mentioned APA format. Interestingly enough, on our campus, we now teach APA exclusively because it's what's prescribed by almost all of the disciplines we teach. But before APA 7th, APA said to use Times Roman font. And I was telling students to use sans serif fonts, not Times Roman, to be consistent with plain language principles. And that confused them. But then when APA 7th came out, it now says you may use other fonts because they're opening up to this, to what's actually happening in our society. So yeah, because of technology, a lot of it's because of technology and how to make things more readable. I had another thought while you were talking, but I lost it, Dawn, sorry.
I do that. I just suck the thoughts out.
No, yeah.
I was just going to chime in and say I love the personal pronoun things too. There's so many times that you read a syllabus and it says like the students will, the instructor will, and it just seems like such a barrier. There's no, you know, it just seems like that kind of writing has no connection between the instructor and the student. So,
and if you're writing a peer-reviewed paper for an academic journal, that makes sense. But if you're writing instructions for a student about an assignment that you want them to do, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
And someone just dropped into the chat that they'd love to see a class on languagism and how language segregates people in different classes. And Andy said, again, shameless plug for linguistics. One of the themes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Again, I'm not prescribing that we all shift over to plain language. I'm not prescribing that we don't use our academic, you know, that in academic settings that we tell them not, that in XPOS 1, we need to teach them in XPOS 1 and 2 to write for academic audiences and academic purposes because that's what they're getting ready to do. But they also need to be aware, and I know that the College of Engineering does a lot of this, that it teaches their, you know, the writing for engineers, and some of the science courses do writing for science disciplines. So just making them aware, because this is the world they live in with technology. This is where they're comfortable. And so it kind of, when I share that with them, they're like, it makes sense of what they're doing every day with their devices, because it's what they're seeing. So when I have them do searches of web pages and analyze web pages, after we've talked about principles of plain language, they look and go, yes, look, that's exactly what they're doing. They see it and it makes sense to them.
Pat, this is Rebecca. I also think it has many implications for us as we rethink our websites for plain language. And I would love to have you give this same presentation for staff who are working on documentation, don't you think, for our students and for our employees?
Absolutely. And sometimes, because I'm so hypersensitive, so when you teach writing, you become hypersensitive to all kinds of things, like you can't not see all the passive verbs. You just can't. They just hit you in the face. But so a lot of correspondence and communication I get that are generated by staff in the university, I'm like, oh, I wish they knew this. So I agree with you, not to undermine, but there are always ways to do it better. There are always ways to do it better. And if we are aware of those tools, why would we not use them?
I will echo that too. I'm Lisa Martin, and I'm a county extension agent in Shawnee County with extension, and my programs, we work with low income families. And so, we have to be very cognizant of teaching simply. I mean, nutrition is very detailed, and to get it into terms that really the general public can understand. And so I think this presentation would be great for our annual conference. So someone might be calling you.
That'd be great. And something else that's occurred to me lately, but in 2010, the law mandates federal agencies to have these policies and trainings in place. At what point any agency that receives federal funding will be required to do this as well. Look how many, we get a lot of federal grants in our institution. At some point, will that trickle down? I don't know, but it's possible.
So I dropped in the chat that one of the ways that I find passive writing in my own writing is to use the by zombies test. So if you say we conducted the study by zombies doesn't work. But if you say the study was conducted by zombies, it works, it's therefore passive. So this is one of the little things that I teach my students to find your passive writing is the by zombies test.
Right, right. Yeah, well, because when we speak informally to people, we speak in heavy passive voice, and that's habitual. But there are ways to increase your awareness and reduce your reliance. A lot of students are just heavily reliant on 5 or 6 passive verbs that they use all the time. And until you point that out to them and raise their awareness and force them to revise with that in mind, yeah, that's a whole nother subject too, but yeah. I don't want to get off on tangents. So what other questions or comments? I'm not here to prescribe. I'm here to invite people to consider something that might help them and might help students, because some of us last year had never taught in online platforms before and were thrown in and forced to put, and it is different. And syllabi are another thing that I would love if I had more drive and ambition to attack this thing that are happening to our syllabi. When I was in college, they handed us a student handbook, and we threw it in the backseat of our car, and it laid there on the floor for the next 4 years. But now we're being asked to incorporate huge segments of the student handbook into our syllabi, where it's no longer 90% of it isn't about my course anymore. And I would love to be able to hand a syllabus to a student that's just about my class. And then here's another document that's the university handbook, or here's a link to the university handbook. But when I have to add 6 pages that are university handbook stuff that have nothing to do with my class, it makes students pay less attention to it because it's too much. And that's a soapbox that I'm on. But I would love to just take my syllabus and think about plain language and only put information about my class and make it more meaningful for my students. But when I have to attach all that other stuff, yeah, it's a problem.
I'll play devil's advocate here because I don't want to be personally responsible for what I'm going to say, but what's to keep you from doing that? What's to keep any of us from just deciding that, and I'm talking this way because this is being recorded, right? So what's to keep any of us from deciding
qualifiers?
The mandatory syllabus statement isn't represented as a link to that page. I mean, what's to keep us from doing that? And I mean, one of the things, and you mentioned plain language, is what's to keep us from taking, again, completely theoretically, from taking one of those statements and putting it into plain language that makes more sense for our students in our class? What's to keep us from doing that?
I don't know. I would just love, I mean, it's not that I don't mind opening the link up and sharing certain things with students, but I don't want it to be part of my syllabus. I just don't. I think it detracts from what my syllabus should be doing. I don't know. I don't know what's to stop us, Dawn. It's a good question. I'd love to be in a conversation with people who are in a position to make a change about that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I personally, and not, speaking with administrators who would be able to maybe inform us better of what is and isn't allowed, but I personally don't see why you couldn't have a link to, like a statement on academic honesty and integrity, and have the link to, here's the text that the university says. Basically what it says is boom, boom, boom. Like, this is what I want you to know about academic integrity, and have it like in 3 bullet points with a link to the full text so that it is there because it's there via a link. I mean,
but the message to us now is that that's mandatory.
Yeah, not to get too far into the weeds, but one thing you can do is just create a page in Canvas and have the policies as a page, and then just link, at the bottom of your syllabus, review these campus policies, or these policies are here for you, that kind of thing. And then you could just update that page every semester whenever the provost updates.
Yeah.
So I'll ask a question, and this is just kind of, you mentioned they're mandatory, and they are. They're mandatory syllabus statements. I think one of the mandatory syllabus statements right now is about mask wearing, right? And how many, I've seen online instructors put that on their syllabus. And
oh, online, oh.
Yeah, so I've seen online instructors put it on there. I've asked, well, why did you do that? And they said, because it's mandatory. And one of the things that I will invite each of us to kind of think about is, you know, what makes sense, right? And I will say that there's probably more mandatory syllabus statements coming down the pipe. You know, kind of, I'm willing to bet we're going to get another one or two coming up pretty soon. And they're good statements. They're good university policies. I think the mandatory syllabus statements we have now are good university policies, but they are university policies. It's kind of like I think Pat is talking about. If I don't put the syllabus on my statement, it doesn't mean it doesn't apply to my class. That is university policy, and it applies to all of our classes. And you know, there might be a possibility at some point that it just goes into Canvas for every student and says these are policies that apply to all of your classes. You know,
why couldn't we just put the student handbook as a link in our Canvas course instead of on our syllabus and show them that it's there? Because a lot of them don't know there is a student handbook or where to get to it. But so if we educate them, because to me, those are student handbook, they're not course specific. They're student handbook policies. And I understand the importance of that. I just struggle putting them all on my syllabus, course syllabus.
Especially because, you know, I think about it from the student perspective. And if every course that a student is taking has an academic integrity policy that's written exactly the same, like what is their motivation to read that 4 or 5 different times each semester? It just makes them not read this, like it encourages them to not read the syllabus.
It diminishes the impact significantly.
It's just repetitive. And so instead of like having those, I think much better like have a link and then put like, for my course, here's what I think is really important, or like, this is what I want you to make sure that you pay attention to about academic integrity as it pertains to the class that I teach. So, because there might be different aspects of academic integrity that are more likely to come up in a specific course, or, you know, I don't know, but just have it be a little bit more related to the course itself, rather than asking students to read the same statement 4 or 5 different times at the beginning of each semester.
You know, Dawn, this might be a conversation to invite Faculty Senate Academic Affairs to have a conversation about.
Yeah, and I co-chair Faculty Affairs and Faculty Senate, and we're having a lot of these conversations about syllabi statements kind of going through. So I don't think that is a bad idea at all. I will say that one of the things that, and some of you have heard me say this before, and I apologize if I'm repeating myself to some of you, but the purpose of a syllabus isn't just informational, it should be inspirational. And I think what we've done is we've turned these into legal contracts rather than this is all the cool stuff you're going to learn in this course. And I would like to see us return to some of that. I mean, you mentioned before, you know, writing it like in this course, you will, not students will. That's more inspiring language. Having student hours, not office hours. That makes it more student focused. Like, I think this is something that is kind of systemic, but I also believe that a lot of this is happening from our stereotypes of what a syllabus would be, and the fact that many people who teach weren't trained to teach. Right. You know, I myself was not trained to teach. I learned things along the way because I wanted to be good at it. I did a lot of reading, went to a lot of workshops, all of those kind of things, as do many of you. And this is why we're all here today. But I think we think that they're supposed to be legalistic. We think if we understood them, right? If they didn't take explanation, if I didn't have to like translate it for my students, then I've somehow not done my job being a professor, you know, or something like that. And I think this is something that we need a climate switch. Yeah, Tucker Jones just posted one of our Engage the Sage on it's on the syllabus. I mean, these are things I talk about a bunch, but I love your point today about communication being key. And if we're not communicating with our writing, if our meaning is not being understood, then it's not worth us writing it. And I think that understanding that teaching is all about effective and excellent communication is a really important takeaway that I'm going to take away from today.
Thank you. And communicating in online platforms is different than communicating for academic audiences or in person. It's a different environment, and the students are actually more comfortable with it than we are. but we're being forced to learn. And so these are just some tools that can help give us food for thought.
And there's some really good food for thought as well in the chat about how we could potentially get around our syllabi getting much longer, and some of the issues like legal counsel that we would have to do, and other ways to get the information to students. So one of the things after these events, we download and review the chats too. So we will be reviewing that information for how we can potentially help out in this conversation with administration. So we have just a couple minutes left. So Pat, I'm wondering if you have any kind of closing thoughts or statements you'd like to make to our group.
No, I'm just really appreciative of seeing people, first of all, faces, and thank you for your time and listening and great comments. And I think this is just the seed of a several bigger conversations that we need to have, and I'd love to be involved in those.
So any final questions or thoughts for Dr. Ackerman?
I hope you all have time to sit outside today. It's a beautiful day.
Well, Pat, thank you so much for sharing this. We got a lot out of it. We will be making both the PowerPoint slide and the video recording of this available for everyone. So watch out for that. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thanks very much. Bye.
Noon next week, teaching chat. Bring your ideas, your questions. We'll have some time to talk about all of those. And also, if you're pursuing the professional development certificate,